Everything began on a morning when I was sitting in a divorce courtroom at the Cook County Family Court in Chicago. My hands were ice cold. My spine went numb. The air in the room felt frozen dark, heavy, under pale white lights and the curious eyes of complete strangers. My husband stood up, pointed directly at me, and in front of everyone, he said that I was a failed mother, that I was not stable enough to raise the very daughter I had given birth to. I thought that was the worst moment of my life, until my daughter, just 7 years old, stood up, dragged her pink backpack onto the bench. She unzipped it and pulled out an old tablet with a cracked corner. "Your Honor, I have something I'd like to show everyone." In that moment, the whole room fell silent, and then everyone who once believed I was the worst person there had to choke back their breath at what that tablet had captured. Where are you watching from? Chicago, New York, Houston, or some small town I've never heard of? Wherever you are, thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you believe no one deserves to have their voice taken away, leave a comment and hit subscribe to stand with those who are finding the light again in their lives. That morning began with a chilling sensation running down my spine as I stepped into the divorce courtroom of the Cook County Family Court in Chicago, a place where shattered stories were put on the scale in a cold and unyielding way. The white lights shining down on the dark wooden walls evoked a sense of severity and heaviness, as if the entire room had been built to witness people who once made vows now turned their backs on each other. Maya Coleman sat quietly on the left side of the bench, my hands clasped so tightly my fingers were growing cold. On the opposite side sat my husband Darius, the man I once believed I would walk with until the end of my life, sitting upright in a perfect gray suit, like a director preparing for an important signing, showing no emotion other than a calmness bordering on indifference. My lawyer, Mr. Harris, a middle-aged black man with a kind face and deep eyes that always radiated composure, leaned over and whispered just loud enough for only me to hear. "Try to stay calm, Maya." I nodded slightly, though I knew full well I was only trying to keep myself from falling apart. Every accusation, every scrutinizing gaze, every memory of the lonely months in my own marriage seemed to be closing in. The soft strike of the gavel sounded as Judge Whitaker entered. He was an older white man with silver hair, a stern face, and sharp eyes that looked as if he could read the truth buried beneath every testimony in the room with just a glance. After everyone stood and sat according to his direction, the judge opened the thick case file before him and spoke in a steady but cold voice. "Today, the court will hear the divorce case between the plaintiff, Mr. Darius Coleman, and the defendant, Mrs. Maya Coleman, along with claims related to property and child custody for the minor, Amira Coleman, 7 years old." Just hearing my daughter's name made my heart tighten. Amira was outside sitting with her aunt, completely unaware that today her father would stand in court and say I was an unfit mother, that I was unstable, that I was a danger to the very child I have loved since the day she was born. Darius's attorney, Ms. Lockwood, rose with the professional, confident demeanor of someone accustomed to winning. She wore an elegant cream-colored blazer, her blonde hair tied neatly at the back, and every word she spoke was clear and razor-sharp, stripping away defense layer by layer. "Your Honor," she began, "my client, Mr. Darius Coleman is the sole provider of stable income for the family, has consistently cared for his daughter, and has maintained an orderly living environment. By contrast, Mrs. Maya has repeatedly shown emotional instability, irresponsibility in maintaining the household, and is engaged in behaviors that have caused psychological harm to the child. I lowered my head, each word like a silent knife piercing my chest. I had read these accusations dozens of times in the documents Darius filed, but hearing them spoken aloud in court, amplified through the microphone recorded word for word by the court clerk, made the pain feel immeasurably worse. Ms. Lockwood lifted a stack of documents and continued. "During the proceedings, we will present photographs of the home at times when cleanliness was not maintained, unreasonable expenditures recorded on the credit card in Mrs. Maya's name, and especially the psychological assessment by Dr. Sloan Carter, concluding that Mrs. Maya does not meet the conditions to care for a minor. My heart dropped. That psychological assessment was something I never had a chance to face or explain. Dr. Carter had never met me in person. Everything she wrote was supposedly the result of natural remote observation, meaning moments cut out of context, interpreted in the most unfavorable way. I remembered when Amira slipped off the slide and burst into tears. I held her in my arms, trembling and comforting her in sheer panic. Yet in the report she wrote, the defendant overreacted further, increasing the child's distress. Can the truth really be twisted so easily? When it was my lawyer's turn, Mr. Harris stood, adjusted his tie, and stepped forward with the composure I had always been grateful for. Your Honor, he began, the plaintiff will present evidence that at first glance may appear unfavorable to my client, but the court will see that the photographs were taken on days when Mrs. Maya was bedridden with a high fever, receiving no assistance whatsoever from her husband. The court will see that the credit card charges were in fact made on a supplementary card that Mr. Darius held and used. And regarding Dr. Carter's report, we will demonstrate that it is a biased assessment, not based on actual interaction, and certainly not reflective of a mother's true nature. I listened as tears welled in my eyes. Mr. Harris was not a flashy attorney, not from an expensive law firm like Darius's side, but he was the only one who believed me even when everything seemed to be against me. In that moment, I couldn't help turning to look at the courtroom door. I didn't see Amira, but the image of her in her pale pink coat legs swinging on a hallway bench made my heart ache to the point of suffocation. I only wished for one thing, that she would never believe her mother was unworthy. I did not know that it would be that very child, my 7-year-old girl with clear eyes and an old tablet with a cracked screen, who would step into the courtroom at a moment no one expected, carrying something that could overturn the ruling. People thought had been decided long before, and when that video played, the entire room would fall silent. That fateful morning had actually begun months earlier with vague signs I wasn't brave enough to confront at the time. But now, sitting in the courtroom surrounded by documents accusing me, I realized everything had been arranged deliberately and coldly, like a chess game in which I was the only one who didn't know the rules. That day, just after I finished cleaning the living room, there was a knock at the door. A mailman in a blue uniform stood on the porch holding a large envelope, printed with the logo of a law firm in downtown Chicago. I still remember the chill running down my spine when I saw the recipient's name written clearly in bold letters, Maya Coleman. I hadn't ordered anything, nor had anyone told me they would send anything. But what weighed on me even more was the mailman's expression, or rather the lack of one, like he had delivered envelopes such as this hundreds of times to women who had no idea their lives were about to be torn apart. When the door closed behind me, I stood still for a few seconds, envelope in hand, feeling as if it weighed twice its actual weight. Amira was on the floor coloring in the book I had bought her the day before, and she looked up and asked in her clear little voice, "Mommy, what is it?" I smiled, trying not to let her see the worry flooding my chest. "Nothing, honey, just paperwork. Keep coloring, okay?" But as soon as she turned back to her drawing, I sat down on the sofa, my fingers trembling slightly as I tore open the corner of the envelope. A thick stack of papers slid onto my lap, and the first line I saw nearly took my breath away. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Divorce. Petition. I read that line over and over again, hoping my eyes were mistaken, but every word stayed sharp as a blade. Plaintiff, Darius Coleman. Defendant, Maya Coleman. Reason, failure in marital and parental roles. My heart sank as if someone had yanked it to the bottom of a well. For years, I had given up a stable job, stayed home to care for our child, managed every meal, every outfit, every class, tried to create a home I believed any husband would want. Yet in a single document, all of that was erased, replaced with 3 cold words, has failed. I turned to the next pages, and each line felt like it was tightening around my neck. Darius was requesting full custody of our child, claiming I was emotionally unstable and harmful to the child's psychological development. He demanded ownership of all assets, including the house I had poured so much effort into to make a home. He even demanded that I leave the house within 10 days of the court accepting the petition. While I was still trying to breathe, the door opened, and Darius walked in as if coming home early was nothing unusual. He saw me sitting in the middle of the divorce documents spread across the coffee table. His face held not an ounce of regret or confusion, just a coldness sharper than any blade cutting into my heart. "Why?" My voice shook, not from anger, but from pain too deep to contain. Darius took off his coat and hung it up, speaking in a steady tone, as if he were explaining a business decision. "Maya, you know we're not right for each other anymore. You've become a burden to me. I can't keep living like this." A burden, I almost whispered. "I've done everything for this family. I gave up my career. I stayed home to care for our child, for you, for every detail of our life." "How can you say that?" Darius turned and looked at me, his eyes so devoid of feeling that it made my skin crawl. "Taking care of the house isn't a contribution. It's the bare minimum a wife should do. And you didn't even do that well." I choked up. All the nights I waited for him until 1 or 2 a.m., all the days I stayed up through the night when Amira was sick, all the times I tried to start conversations to save a marriage growing colder, all of it reduced to one final sentence. "You didn't do it well." Darius stepped closer, his voice dropping but sharp enough to make me instinctively back away. "My lawyer has collected enough evidence. I'll get custody of Amira, and you won't get anything." He paused for a moment, then gave a thin ice smile. "Even the child is ready to testify against you." It felt like someone had punched me in the chest. "Amira, no. Amira loves me so much." He shrugged. "Kids are easy to influence. And I know what to tell her." I didn't sleep that night. I sat by Amira's bed, watching her sleep with rosy cheeks and curls spread over the pillow. Sometimes she pursed her lips or shifted, and I wished everything was just a nightmare. But the document in the living room remained there, cold, ruthless, and calculated. And I had no idea that this was only the beginning. A few days later, when I tried to find a lawyer to defend myself, I discovered something that nearly made me collapse. Our joint bank account, the one I always thought was a secure safety net, had been emptied. Completely. A series of transactions had been transferred into another account I knew nothing about. All of it had been done over months, right when Darius began to grow distant from me. No money, no house, no truth on my side. But what made me cry most wasn't the papers or the numbers, but the feeling of being betrayed in a calculated way by the very person who once vowed to protect me. And I still didn't know that in the low cabinet in the living room, among scattered toys, there was an old tablet with a cracked screen where my daughter had recorded something Darius never expected, something that would bring his entire plan crashing down. The morning after I discovered our joint account had been drained, a light rain fell over Chicago, tiny droplets clinging to the window of the old taxi I had to call because my own car had been kept by Darius for work purposes. I slumped in the back seat, the divorce files pressed tightly against my chest, my fingers trembling with each pothole the car hit. Inside me, despair had expanded like a heavy cloud, and no matter how many deep breaths I took, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being thrown out of my own life. I had called more than 8 law offices throughout the morning. Some refused as soon as they learned I didn't have enough money for a retainer. Others were more polite, but still said they could not take on a complicated case without financial assurance. Some heard the name of Darius's lawyer, Ms. Lockwood, and immediately advised me to consider a divorce settlement to minimize damage. I realized that in the icy landscape of American divorces, women like me cut off financially, psychologically manipulated, pushed out of our own homes, were the easiest to crush. When the taxi stopped in front of a small commercial strip in South Side, I looked out through the window and almost laughed a bitter metallic sound. The faded sign outside the 2-story building read, "Abernathy and Associates Family Law Divorce and Custody." The word associates was half peeled off. I had no choice. This was the only address recommended by a distant acquaintance, and the only lawyer who listened to my story over the phone without asking about money first. I walked up a narrow staircase to the law office. It smelled of old paper wood and a faint scent of strong coffee. On the wall were worn certificates belonging to attorney Jerome Abernathy, a black man in his late 50s with eyes that held something both weary and warm, as if he had seen many family tragedies and was still trying to believe that a few of them could be saved. He stood when I entered, shook my hand gently, and invited me to sit in an older leather chair. "Mrs. Maya, is it? Just tell me everything you need to say. No rush." Those words, "no rush," nearly broke me. How long had it been since anyone said that to me? I opened the file and recounted everything piece by piece, from Darius's coldness, the divorce petition, the emptied bank account, to the psychological report I never had a chance to respond to. Tears began falling at some point without me realizing it, but Mr. Abernathy simply offered me a box of tissues and let me continue, not interrupting, not judging, not giving me that doubtful look the other 8 lawyers had. When I finished speaking, I felt as if my body had emptied out by a few pounds, but lighter too, because at least someone finally listened. Mr. Abernathy leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the documents as though trying to piece together a distorted puzzle. He was silent for a long moment before letting out a deep breath. "Maya," he said in a low voice, "this is not simple. I have to be honest. Your husband prepared very thoroughly. What Ms. Lockwood submitted to the court carries weight. You're going to face a hard battle." I lowered my head, clasping my hands tightly to stop them from shaking violently. "I'm only afraid of losing Amira. I don't need money. I don't need the house. I only need my daughter." He looked at me for a few more seconds, and in his gaze there was deep contemplation. "I believe you love your child," he said, "but to win a case like this, love is not enough. We need evidence. We need something stronger than what they're holding." I was confused. I don't have anything." "We will," he said slowly. "Find something." He opened the file, checking each section. When he reached the psychological assessment, he frowned. "Dr. Sloane Carter. I've seen that name a few times. She's known to be sharp. But this kind of unilateral observation report, if there's any inconsistency, then a single conflicting piece of evidence can destroy its credibility." I swallowed hard. "But I don't have anything to counter it." Mr. Abernathy fell silent again, as if listening to a thought crossing his mind. "Maya, is there anything in your former home, anything at all, a device, a recording, something belonging to your husband that might contain important information?" I shook my head. I was forced out too quickly. Everything was arranged by Darius. He looked at me a moment longer, then lowered his voice. "Are you sure? Nothing left behind? No toys, devices, hidden corners in the house where you remember something unusual?" And then it happened. A sudden memory flashed in my mind, making me grip the armrest of the chair. "There is something," I said softly, as if afraid of hearing myself Amira's old tablet. "The screen is cracked. She kept it even when I moved to the new apartment. I don't understand why. It doesn't even work for watching shows or playing games anymore." Mr. Abernathy leaned forward. "Where is that tablet now?" "In her room. In her purple backpack." He stared at me for a long moment as if he had just heard the most important detail since I walked in. "Maya," he said slowly, his voice heavy but attentive, "why would a child keep the most useless object like a treasure? Have you ever asked her?" I shook my head again. "No, I've been too busy trying to stay standing." "Bring the tablet here tomorrow," he said, and there was a cautious spark of hope in his eyes. "I won't promise anything. But sometimes the truth doesn't hide in the things we choose to keep. It hides in the things we never pay attention to." I left the office in the heavy afternoon rain, my heart still tangled, but carrying something, a tiny, persistent speck of light for the first time in months of drowning in despair. I did not yet know that the cracked tablet, the thing that seemed like nothing more than a broken toy my daughter kept for some childish reason, held the key to blowing open the entire scheme Darius had built. And everything would begin to surface the next day. That night, after picking Amira up from school, I tried to keep my attitude as normal as possible, even though inside me there was a storm churning endlessly. She chattered about music class, about how the teacher let everyone try little drums, and how she kept perfect rhythm. So well, the teacher praised her in front of the whole class. I nodded, smiling, listening to every word, yet still feeling something incomplete, because beneath my smile there was a slow, constant ache. She had no idea that her future might be decided by a document her father fabricated and a lie adults used to judge her based on a few isolated moments. It wasn't until Amira went to the bathroom to wash her face and get into her pajamas that I stepped into her small bedroom. The room was just big enough to hold a single bed, a low bookshelf, and a little desk, but it was the only place in our new rented apartment that made me feel like I still had one piece of my old life. I knelt beside her purple backpack, the one she carried everywhere since the day we were forced to leave our home, and I slowly unzipped it, as if something more fragile than glass lay inside. The old tablet was at the bottom of the bag, wedged between a comic book and a box of crayons. The cracked screen covered nearly half the surface, the fractures branching like gray spider webs from the top left corner down toward the center. I picked it up and a cold sensation ran along my fingers, not because of the worn device itself, but because Mr. Abernathy's words from that afternoon echoed again in my mind. Sometimes, the truth is in the things we don't think about. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the tablet in my lap, lightly brushing my hand over the cracked glass. It powered on after a few seconds, the dim screen lighting up with a wallpaper of me and Amira at Lake Michigan last summer, back when we were still a family, or at least that's what I believed. I opened the video folder. Immediately, I noticed something strange. 5 video files created during the last 2 months we lived together in the house in Hyde Park. I hadn't recorded them, and Amira, with her tiny hands and typical childish clumsiness, couldn't have intentionally filmed long clips like these. I stopped breathing for a moment as I opened the first file. The frame was tilted somewhat dark, as if the camera had been placed behind a potted plant or in some hidden corner of the living room. I heard Darius's familiar footsteps, keys jingling, then his voice talking to someone in a light, gentle tone I never knew he could use with anyone except our daughter. Then a woman's voice came in warm, sweet, but clearly intimate enough to make my chest tighten. I couldn't see their faces from that angle, but just listening to their conversation was enough to confirm what my heart had suspected for a long time. I stopped the video before it ended, my hand shaking violently. The room felt quieter than when Amira was asleep, so silent I could hear my own heart pounding. I took a deep breath and opened the second file. This time the sound was clearer, Darius's laughter, and the woman responding with a sentence that made coldness race up my spine. As long as she doesn't know, everything stays under control. I shut my eyes, the pain hitting me square in the chest. So those rare smiles he gave me in the final months, those lazy apologies for coming home late, those half-hearted words of comfort, they were all part of a performance I didn't know I was starring in. I continued watching the third video, then the fourth, and finally the fifth, the longest and maybe the most vicious. The camera faced the living room more clearly, and I recognized it as the night I had a high fever. In the video, the woman sat on the sofa, Darius standing in front of her with a glass of wine, speaking in a self-satisfied tone. Once we get that psychological report into the case, the court will never give Amira to her. She's too emotional, too panicky. Just push the right buttons, and she'll destroy herself in front of the judge. The woman laughed lightly, a delicate but cruel sound. "You're sure I've prepared everything," Darius replied. "Just push her past her limit, and she'll yell cry, and the court will fill in the rest." I dropped the tablet onto the bed, feeling as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. I knew Darius had become cold, calculating that he wanted to push me out of his life, but I never imagined he would create an entire detailed plan to destroy my reputation in court, to take Amira from me, my child, the one I carried for 9 months, the one I loved with every breath. Just then, Amira opened the door, her little curls damp around her rosy cheeks after her bath. "Mommy, did you see my tablet? I need it for my alarm tomorrow." I turned to look at her, and in that moment I understood why Mr. Abernathy had asked me that question this afternoon. She looked at the tablet with a strange expression, both protective and nervous, as if it wasn't just an old toy anymore, but something more important, something she kept as a secret. I handed her the tablet. "Did you record these videos, Amira?" She paused for a second, then walked closer, her clear eyes meeting mine. I didn't mean to at first, but I saw Daddy bring that lady inside and I didn't want Mommy to be sad, so I hid behind the plant. The tablet turned the camera on. Then I kept it, because Daddy said Mommy must never know anything. I pulled her into my arms, feeling my heart break and mend at the same time. My little girl, with her innocent mind, had accidentally recorded what adults thought they had hidden perfectly. And it was Amira, who had brought the truth closer to me than anyone else. After she fell asleep, I looked at the tablet again, my heart aching, but lit by a faint, undeniable hope. These videos, blurry though they were filmed by the shaky hands of a 7-year-old, might be exactly the evidence Mr. Abernathy and I had been desperate to find. And as I lay down beside Amira, my hand resting on her soft hair, I understood one thing tomorrow. When I brought the tablet to the lawyer's office, everything would change. Maybe not instantly, maybe not easily, but a door had opened, a door Darius never imagined, and I would walk through it with every ounce of strength I had left to protect my daughter. The next morning, Chicago greeted me with a thin veil of mist hanging over the pavement, making everything in the city look as if it were covered by a pale gray curtain, cold, quiet, and strangely humbling. I drove an old car borrowed from my sister to Attorney Abernathy's office, the tablet carefully wrapped in a bag and placed on the passenger seat, as if it were more fragile than anything I had ever held. I don't remember how many times I breathed during that 10-plus-mile drive. All I knew was that my heart pounded every time I thought about the videos I had watched the night before, clips that captured betrayal calculation, and words I would never have believed Darius could utter to another woman right inside the house where our daughter grew up, had I not heard them myself. When I stepped into the law office, Mr. Abernathy was standing at his wooden desk covered in notes and documents. He looked up, saw me, and immediately recognized the anxiety I hadn't managed to hide. "You brought it, didn't you?" "Maya," I nodded, sitting down in the chair across from him. My fingers trembled just opening the bag's zipper. I set the tablet on the table, and strangely, despite the cracked screen and the scuffed exterior, looking at it in that moment felt as if I were placing a piece of my daughter's heart on the table, a piece of truth she had been keeping without me ever knowing. "Let's watch from the beginning," Mr. Abernathy said with a small nod. I handed him the device. The tablet lit up the screen, dimmed slightly from the cracks, but the video appeared clearer than I remembered. Mr. Abernathy slipped on his glasses, leaned forward, and opened the first file. The room immediately filled with the sound of Darius's footsteps, keys turning. Then a woman's voice, a voice I recognized instantly, unhidden intimacy, an ease that should have existed only between a husband and wife. Mr. Abernathy said nothing, but I saw the muscles tighten slightly along his jaw. The second video played next this time, the conversation even clearer. Their collusive words admitting I was seen as an obstacle, that my emotions were a burden, that no matter how hard I tried, I would be defined by 2 words, not enough. Darius spoke with arrogant confidence, and the woman, undoubtedly Dr. Sloane Carter, responded with promises and plans to make sure everything goes smoothly. I sat still, listening to each word like listening to a sentence that had hovered over my head for months, but this time it was a sentence for them, not for me. Mr. Abernathy watched while making notes, his eyes growing sharper with every line that revealed their intention to manipulate. When we reached the final video, the longest and clearest, Mr. Abernathy put his pen down entirely. The angle showed both of them standing in the living room of our old home. Darius was smiling with a confidence that made my stomach churn, while Dr. Carter sat on the sofa holding a glass of red wine, legs crossed her face, showing the satisfaction of someone who believed they had already won something. Then came the moment that made my breath stop, spoken with casual cruelty. Darius said that all they needed to do was push me just past my limit, and I would reveal my true nature in court, that Dr. Carter would use those moments to reinforce the psychological report, that Amira would get used to not having a mother. That last sentence made my heart clench, as if someone cold had closed their hand around it. When the video ended, the room sank into silence. It no longer felt like an old law office, but a space holding a secret too big evidence that not only exposed betrayal, but revealed a complete plan designed to destroy me as a woman and as a mother. Maya, Mr. Abernathy finally said, his voice low but firm. This isn't just evidence. This is a reversal of the entire case. What they did isn't just unethical, it's severely illegal. I looked at him, feeling tears threaten to spill. Can you save me? Save Amira? He didn't answer immediately. He took off his glasses, wiped the frames with a cloth, then spoke with a certainty I had never heard from him before. I'm not just going to save you, Maya. I'm going to bring everything that happened into the light. From this moment on, because of what that tablet captured, this is no longer a normal divorce case. He leaned closer, his expression sharpening like someone who had fought the harshest legal battles. This is court fraud. This is conspiracy. This is evidence that they intentionally tried to manipulate the outcome of the hearing, intentionally defame your character and your capability as a mother, and intentionally use a falsified psychological report to take your child away from you. The court will not overlook this. I listened to each word as if breathing air for the first time in months. We're going to submit these videos. We will request the court to halt proceedings pending investigation, and we will show them that a mother cannot simply be erased from her child's life because her husband thinks he has the power to decide it. I didn't speak for several seconds. I simply placed a hand over my chest, feeling my heart open slightly for the first time in months, though it was still aching. When I left the office, Mr. Abernathy walked me to the door. He added one more sentence, his voice soft, but carrying the strength of a promise. Prepare yourself, Maya. The truth is about to come into the light, and someone is going to face consequences. I walked down the narrow staircase of the building, clutching the tablet against me. The street ahead was still gray, still misted, but for the first time I felt that beyond that haze was not only despair anymore, but an opportunity to reclaim my life, to reclaim my daughter, to stand up from what they tried to shatter. And I didn't know that in just a few days that tablet would appear in court on a large screen before the eyes of people who had believed I was a failed mother and would leave them utterly silent one by one. The next day, a light rain fell over Chicago, not enough to soak a coat, but enough to leave tiny circular marks across the pavement, as if the city were whispering something to those who passed through it. I arrived at the courthouse very early, the black umbrella trembling slightly in my hand, from the wind, my heart pounding heavy and fast, like it was trying to outrun my chest and escape a battle I could no longer avoid. Mr. Abernathy was already waiting outside, his salt and pepper hair slightly damp, but his eyes brighter and sharper than usual, the eyes of a man who knows he is about to step into a fight where the truth stands firmly on his side. Good, Maya, he said, his voice low but steady. We've filed an emergency motion to admit new evidence. The court will review it first thing this morning. I couldn't say anything but nod. I knew he wasn't telling me everything. Victory is never simple when your opponent has staged an entire performance, complete with props and rehearsed players. But the tablet in my hand, that small object, had already torn through the curtain of that performance Darius spent months constructing, and now Mr. Abernathy only needed to pull the rest of it down to expose every lie. When we stepped into the courtroom, the air was as cold and heavy as always, the white overhead lights outlining every tense expression in the room. Darius was already seated, wearing a new light gray suit, looking confident, as if today was merely the final step before the court handed him full custody of Amira. Beside him sat Dr. Sloane Carter, her blonde hair framing a face of professional poise, a notepad in hand as if she were prepared to present an irrefutable report. She didn't look at me, but her gaze flicked over me, once quick, smug, like she was checking to see whether the prey was still breathing before the proceedings began. The judge entered the gavel, striking lightly and cutting through every whisper. Court is now in session. Today, we will review supplemental arguments from the respondent. Mr. Abernathy rose immediately. Your Honor, we request to present new evidence that directly affects the credibility and legality of all materials previously submitted by the petitioner. Darius turned to his attorney, Mr. Bradley, his face tightening for the first time. I saw the two exchange a few rapid words, but they couldn't hide their confusion. "What evidence?" the judge asked, looking down at the file before him. Mr. Abernathy stepped forward. "Video recordings taken inside the marital home. The recordings clearly demonstrate collusion, fraud, and conspiracy by the petitioner to manipulate court proceedings and present falsified evidence to obtain custody." The courtroom erupted into murmurs for a few seconds. Darius shot to his feet, his voice nearly cracking. "That footage is illegal. It can't be admitted." "Sit down, Mr. Brooks," the judge said, his tone sharp as a blade. "The court will determine admissibility after review." In that moment, I saw something I had never witnessed once in my entire marriage: real fear on Darius's face. Not confidence, not arrogance, not that thin, controlling smile. Just panic calculation and the dawning realization that everything he built out of lies had just been shoved to the edge of collapse. The tablet was placed on the court clerk's table. A court technician connected it to the large display screen at the front. The click of the cable locking into place sounded so loud that it sent a chill down my spine, because I knew the moment the screen lit up would be the moment Darius and Dr. Carter's lives split in two, into a before and after with no way back. "Play the first video," the judge said. The giant screen brightened. The tilted dim frame appeared, and then Darius's voice echoed through the room, close and unmistakably clear, as if he were standing right beside me. His laughter, Sloane's whispering reply, then the sentences, each word falling into the courtroom like a hammer blow against wood instructions, assurances that they would push Maya past her limit, promises that the psychological report would align perfectly with the reactions they planned to provoke in me. Chairs scraped in the gallery. Someone exhaled sharply. A court assistant's jaw dropped, hanging open for a few seconds before slowly closing. By the midpoint of the first video, the judge's expression had changed completely, his brow tightening, his grip on his pen so firm the tip trembled slightly. When the second video played, then the third, the room grew so silent I could hear the rain tapping lightly against the glass. Every sentence from Darius and Sloane tore through my heart again, but strangely, it created a new strength inside me, as if truth, when finally exposed, does not just wound, but returns something whole to the person who has been wronged. When the final video ended, no one spoke, not because they didn't want to, but because they could not. The air was thick, heavy, as though everyone was trying to digest the reality that had just been dropped into the room with blunt, undeniable force. It was the judge who broke the silence with a sentence I will never forget. "Mr. Brooks, explain yourself." Darius opened his mouth, but what came out were nothing but stammering fragments. "Dr." Sloane Carter sat beside him, gripping her notebook tightly, her face pale, her lips quivering as she tried to summon some justification for using her position as a tool in a fraudulent plan. But every possible escape had already been sealed before they could reach it. The judge placed both hands on the bench, leaning forward. His gaze cut through the two of them. "The court will recess for 15 minutes. When we return, we will address the legal consequences of what we've just seen." I sank into my seat, my arms falling limp at my sides, but inside me it felt as though warm water was pouring into a space that had been frozen for months. I didn't know what would happen next in that courtroom, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt I was no longer standing at the edge of a cliff. For the first time, I felt I could win. The 15-minute recess did not feel like the small slice of time indicated by the clock on the wall. It stretched heavy and long, as if the entire courtroom were holding its breath in a silence no one dared break with even a whisper. I stood near the hallway window watching the scattered rain fall in the courthouse courtyard, trying to keep myself calm before stepping into the next phase one that would determine whether months of humiliation, defamation, and being labeled an unstable mother could finally be washed clean under the light of justice. Mr. Abernathy came to stand beside me, clutching his file case, like it was the only shield between us and the storm waiting inside the courtroom. "Maya," he said quietly, "now we don't have to prove your innocence anymore. What we need the court to see is that they built an entire mechanism to destroy your life, and fortunately they recorded themselves doing it. I nodded, though my throat tightened, as if something invisible were pressing gently against it. I knew he was trying to reassure me, but I also knew that no matter how clear the truth seemed, any hearing, no matter how strong your evidence could twist in an instant if the other side found a way to bend it. When we returned to the courtroom, everyone was back in their seats. The atmosphere had changed. It was no longer cold, but vibrating with a new energy, an anxious anticipation, as if everyone present understood that what came next was not merely a continuation of a divorce hearing, but a moment where justice itself would be tested against blatant wrongdoing. Darius sat in his place again, but he was nothing like the man who had swaggered in earlier that morning. His face had gone pale, his hands clasped together so tightly that his knuckles were bone white. He avoided looking at me, avoided looking at anyone, as if eye contact alone might drag the truth he tried to bury back to the surface. Dr. Sloane Carter sat motionless, a pencil broken in two in her hand without her noticing. Her previously smooth, well-styled blonde hair was now slightly mussed on one side from running her fingers through it during the recess. Her eyes stared straight ahead but weren't focused on anything. Perhaps she was trapped in her own words the videos had captured that she could never take back. The judge entered. The gavel struck clean and cold like metal hitting stone. Court is back in session. No one moved, no one breathed loudly. Everyone waited. Based on the video evidence presented, the judge said, his voice slow but full of authority. The court requires the petitioner to explain why the content in these recordings directly contradicts the sworn statements, the psychological report, and the petition for child custody. Bradley Darius's attorney stood trying to maintain composure, but with a slight tremor in his voice. Your Honor, we request time to verify the validity. The judge raised a hand, cutting him off. The validity of the evidence has been verified. The recordings were made in the marital home show no signs of tampering, and the individuals in the video self-identify their actions. The petitioner does not need to discuss admissibility. The petitioner needs to provide an explanation. The room went stone silent. Darius stood, or rather was forced to stand because the judge's gaze was fixed directly on him. The first few seconds he couldn't speak at all, as if the words were caught somewhere in his chest. Then he tried to regain his voice, but it no longer sounded like the man who once stood in front of hundreds of employees leading corporate meetings. Your Honor, I was set up. That video was edited, and the woman in the video, enough. The judge's tone sliced through the room like a blade. The woman in the video is sitting right there, and I will ask her directly. Dr. Carter jolted upright as if someone had yanked a string from behind. She stood, hands instinctively gripping the edges of her blazer. Dr. Carter, the judge said, "Do you deny that the voice in the video is yours?" A long silence followed, cold, as if the entire room had been placed in a freezer. Your Honor, no. Do you deny that what you said and did in the video directly contradicts the psychological report you submitted to this court? She swallowed her voice barely above a whisper. No. Do you deny receiving compensation from Mr. Brooks in exchange for providing a biased and false psychological report? She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again, the look of someone who knows there is no way out ahead. No! Murmurs rippled through the gallery like a wave sweeping down the rows of benches. Someone gasped aloud. A woman covered her mouth, eyes wide. The truth had just been spoken from the very lips of the person who tried to use her credentials and reputation to destroy me. The judge turned his gaze directly to Darius. Mr. Brooks, she has admitted to it. The court requires your answer to the final question. Do you admit to intentionally manipulating these proceedings by creating falsified evidence, conspiring with a specialist to defame your wife in order to gain custody of your child? The judge's voice sounded like a sentence not yet delivered but inevitable. Darius remained silent, but silence did not save him. It merely made the room heavier, and it took the judge only 3 seconds to deliver a line I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Because you have not answered, the court will consider that an admission. There was a sound like metal hitting the floor behind us, likely Darius's attorney dropping his pen. In that instant, I felt no triumph, no gloating, All I felt was a chilling wave passing down my spine because even though I had known he betrayed me, I had never imagined he would go so far as to cut me out of our daughter's life in such a calculated, brutal way. But the judge was not finished. "This hearing will proceed to sentencing today," he said. "The court now has sufficient grounds to render a decision." Darius collapsed into his seat, face drained as if every drop of blood had left it. Dr. Carter raised her hands to her face, shoulders shaking with frantic breaths. Both of them understood there was no way back. As for me, for the first time in many long months, I felt my heart loosen from the invisible grip that had held it. I took a deep breath, and that breath filled the place where fear had lived for too long. The door to justice had finally opened a crack. The court reconvened after 10 minutes to prepare for sentencing, but those 10 minutes did not feel like ordinary time. They stretched into something like their own separate lifetime, a space where everyone in the room had to confront a truth that had just surfaced, one weighty enough that no one, not even the people sitting in the gallery, could breathe normally. I sat on the bench, hands clasped tightly in my lap, eyes fixed on the pale gray tiles beneath my feet, though my mind kept running back to Amira, the child I had tried to protect with everything I had left. When the judge returned, the sound of the gavel was different from any time before. It didn't merely announce that court was back in session. It was the sound of something sharp, cutting through months of ambiguity, suspicion, and the careful, false narrative Darius had built. "We will now proceed with sentencing," the judge said. His voice low and clear, not loud but strong enough to wash over even the smallest sound in the courtroom. After reviewing all evidence testimony, and in particular the video recordings demonstrating serious fraud in preparation of the petitioner's case file, the court has reached a decision. Darius shifted as if some part of him wanted to run, but his feet were nailed to the floor by the knowledge that any movement now was useless. Attorney Bradley sat behind him, sweat collecting on his forehead, his hand gripping a stack of documents that only minutes ago had been their last source of hope, but now were nothing but useless paper. And Dr. Sloane Carter, the woman who entered this courtroom with icy confidence, was now squeezing her hands together so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Her face no longer held the calm a psychologist should project. It was replaced by an undercurrent of panic, like someone watching the boundaries of her career and freedom crack open. The judge turned a page in the thick file in front of him, then looked straight at Darius. Based on the findings of the court, he began each word landing like heavy stones on the ground. The petitioner, Mr. Darius Brooks, deliberately committed fraud, fabricated evidence, and conspired with a specialist to falsify court documents in order to unlawfully obtain custody. With every sentence he spoke, my spine straightened a little more, though I remained still. I didn't want to feel triumphant. I just wanted to feel the weight of fairness returning inch by inch. The psychological report submitted was proven to be false, intentionally designed to undermine the credibility and parental capacity of the respondent, Ms. Maya Henderson. The conversations captured in the video demonstrate clear collusion between Mr. Brooks and Dr. Carter in constructing a completely false narrative. Murmurs swelled behind us again, this time louder, like a wave of indignation crashing against the wooden walls of the courtroom. Someone exhaled sharply, as if trying not to shout. The judge continued, "With indisputable evidence, the court hereby orders the following." The entire room seemed to tilt downward into silence. First, the court denies the petitioner's motion for full custody. Darius jolted as if struck in the chest. He tried to speak, but Attorney Bradley placed a hand on his arm and shook his head slightly, knowing that any words now would only make things worse. Second, full custody of the minor child Amira Brooks is awarded to the respondent, Ms. Maya Henderson. I did not cry. I did not smile. I simply felt an invisible weight that had been crushing my chest for months finally lift, leaving behind a hollow space, both light and aching relief, mixed with exhaustion. Third, the judge said, his tone hardening like steel, the court orders a criminal investigation into Mr. Darius Brooks and Dr. Sloane Carter on charges of court fraud, fabrication of evidence, defamation, and intentional manipulation of trial proceedings. A few quiet, "oh my God," whispers escaped from the gallery. A man shook his head, looking at the person next to him as if to confirm he hadn't misheard. Dr. Carter lifted both hands to her mouth, tears spilling out her face, trembling as if she were looking at the opening door of a prison cell, and in truth, that was exactly what was waiting for her. Darius collapsed into his seat, hands covering his head. No more arrogance, no more confidence, no echo of the manipulative words he'd spoken on camera, only complete ruin. Fourth, the judge continued, all assets withdrawn by Mr. Brooks from the joint marital account are to be fully returned to the respondent. Financial terms of the divorce will be reconsidered pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. Mr. Abernathy nodded slightly, and I knew this was the nod of a man who had fought with every ounce of experience and belief in justice and had finally been answered. Then the judge looked directly at me. "Ms. Henderson," he said, his voice a little softer, "the court acknowledges your patience and composure throughout these proceedings, particularly in the face of serious fraud and defamation. Without the incidentally recorded video, this truth may never have been revealed. All I could do was bow my head. I thought of Amira, the small, bright child forced to witness something no child should have to witness. It was her quiet observation and hidden fear I had never noticed that held the truth no team of Darius's lawyers could conceal. "This hearing is adjourned," the judge said, tapping the gavel lightly. The sound echoed, but this time it wasn't the cold finality of law. It sounded like a lock releasing on a door I had been pushing against for months, one that finally swung open. Mr. Abernathy rested a hand on my shoulder. "Maya, you've just gotten your life back." And as I stood, my legs still trembling, I understood he was right. The path ahead would not necessarily be easy, but at least I no longer had to fight in the dark. A chapter had just closed, not with bitter tears, but with truth, the very thing they tried to bury, but that my daughter brought into the light. 2 days after that historic hearing, Chicago suddenly warmed a little, even though March still clung to a stubborn cold that refused to let go. I remember that morning clearly, a morning where thin sunlight slipped into the small apartment I was renting, reflecting off pale walls and making the space look alive for the first time in months. I sat at the little dining table, opened the old laptop I had previously used, only to check minor work emails. But today, it became the window through which I saw something unexpected, our story. The story of me and Amira had spread farther than I ever imagined. A neighbor sent me a link to an article. "Single mother nearly loses child after husband and psychologist manipulate court, but truth from cracked tablet saves the trial." Hundreds of comments followed, mostly from people I had never met, yet they wrote with outrage on my behalf and sympathy for a child dragged into the brutal plans of adults. I read every word, my hands shaking, not from fear, but because for the first time in months, I realized the world outside wasn't as cold as Darius had made me believe. But while public attention stirred, the real storm was about to break over the people who caused all of this. That afternoon, Attorney Abernathy called. His voice was low, yet there was a hint of relief I had never heard from him before. "Maya, the Chicago Police Department has officially opened a criminal investigation. They've started questioning both Darius and Dr. Carter." I went silent for a few seconds, my fingers curling into a fist on the edge of the table, not because I wanted them jailed, but because I still wasn't used to the feeling of justice actually moving. Abernathy continued, "The case is more serious than people realize. Court fraud, submitting falsified evidence, attempting to manipulate judicial outcomes, embezzlement from joint accounts. Any one of those charges is enough to put them behind bars." I asked quietly, "Will they really pay for what they did?" "You don't have to hope they pay," he said. "The truth is doing that for you." 3 days later, Darius was formally suspended from the corporation where he worked. The only photo I saw of him that week came from a news article, a picture of him leaving the police department, his face exhausted. His expensive suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow like someone who had just realized the world was no longer his to command. I felt no glee, but I also felt no pain. As for Dr. Sloane Carter, the woman who weaponized her knowledge against me, her ending was different. The Illinois Board of Psychology immediately opened a disciplinary hearing, and what happened in my courtroom became the central issue. A psychologist involved in a scheme to deceive a court is unforgivable. Her license was suspended, then revoked indefinitely. When I thought of that, I felt no joy. I only remembered how she looked, sitting in court hands, shaking eyes fixed on the floor as if she could see her entire career collapsing from just a few sentences of her own voice echoing from a tablet screen. Justice isn't always beautiful, but this time it was unmistakable. A week later, life for my daughter and me began to change in the smallest yet most comforting ways. Amira returned to school with a full, genuine smile, not the forced smile she wore during the months we lived in a house where Darius fed her dark thoughts about her mother. On that first morning back, she squeezed my hand tightly before running to class, then suddenly turned around and shouted across the schoolyard, "Mommy, I'm proud of you." I froze, unable to speak. Those 5 words healed more than anything a doctor or therapist could ever do. That evening, while she sat coloring on the living room floor, I sat beside her, placed a hand on her curls, and asked, "Do you feel better now, Amira?" She looked up, her big brown eyes glistening under the light. "I'm okay, Mommy. Now Daddy doesn't say bad things about you. I know everything now." I paused. You know," Amira nodded, not sad, not angry, just like a child accepting that sometimes adults do strange things. "I know Daddy was wrong, but I still love Daddy. It's just, I love Mommy more." I started crying instantly, but this time the tears weren't bitter. The new apartment I rented, with part of the money restored after the court ruling, a small 3rd-floor place in Rogers Park, wasn't fancy, wasn't spacious, but it filled with light in the morning and was quiet enough at night that I could hear my daughter breathing in her sleep. White walls, a few old pieces of furniture left by the landlord, and a tiny balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. Those things made it feel like a true beginning. One evening, while I sat at the kitchen table reviewing monthly expenses, Mr. Abernathy called simply to ask, "Are you breathing easier now, Maya?" I looked around my apartment, small, simple, but completely free, and said, "Yes, sir," for the first time in a very long time. He gave a soft chuckle. "Good. Now just keep living, keep raising that little girl the way you have. Let the law handle the rest." I knew life wouldn't instantly become perfect. I knew there would be more financial hearings ahead, the investigation, and endless legal paperwork. But I also knew the most important thing had been preserved: Amira. No one would ever take her from me again. That night, as I closed Amira's door, an amber nightlight glowing softly around her small bed, I stood watching the child I had almost lost. She hugged her old stuffed bear, her breathing steady, her face peaceful, as if the outside world had never tried to rip her from my arms. And in that moment, for the first time in months, I found myself smiling, truly smiling. Not because I had won, but because I finally didn't have to fight alone. Time passed slowly but steadily, as if the universe was deliberately giving me and Amira a chance to rearrange the pieces that had fallen too quickly over the past months. Every morning when weak sunlight slipped into our small apartment, I felt as though life was sending a gentle reminder that sometimes the best beginnings come from the humblest places. I started working again part-time at a nearby cooking center. It wasn't a dream job, but it smelled like toasted bread, melted butter, marinated meat, all the scents that reminded me of the time I used to feel valuable before Darius made me believe the things I did were just house chores. The irony was that the very dishes he once called bland, ordinary, not high class enough for corporate dinners, were now bringing me my first real income to build true independence. Amira changed too, not suddenly, not dramatically, but like a flower finally getting sunlight after too long in a dark corner. She slept deeper, ate better, and her smile was no longer half there the way it used to be. Every afternoon after school, Amira ran into the apartment with steps so fast and free that sometimes I wanted to cry just from watching her, being a normal child. One day, as I worked on my first attempt at teaching a cupcake class, Amira came next to me and handed me a crayon drawing. "Mommy, I made this for you." The picture showed two figures, me and her, standing on a hill, surrounded by blue sky and a yellow-orange sun. We were holding hands. At the bottom, Amira had written in crooked letters, "Me and Mommy, safe." I had to turn away for a moment so my tears wouldn't fall on the paper. Safe, she had lived so long in an environment where that simple word became a rare gift. And now, Amira could feel it. Feel that no one could pull her from my arms anymore. The criminal investigation into Darius and Sloane Carter continued, but those days I no longer obsessed over every step of their case. I let the investigators do their job and let the law handle what was left. Even so, sometimes in the evening when the apartment was quiet and I was prepping breakfast for the next day, I would still remember the trial, the way the room fell silent when the videos played, the stunned look on Darius's face, the desperate eyes of Sloane. Not to savor victory, but to remind myself that truth is always worth it, even when it hurts. One Friday afternoon, as I sat in front of my laptop taking notes for cooking lessons, the doorbell rang. I startled. Very few people knew my new address besides a handful of relatives. When I opened the door, I saw a man standing there, tall black, a serious face, but gentle eyes, a social worker assigned by the court to check Amira's living conditions after the case. "Maya Henderson," he said, showing his ID. "My name is Carter Hayes. I've been assigned to monitor your daughter's case for a while. I invited him in." Carter stepped into the apartment, letting his eyes drift over the simple but tidy space. A few small plants I had started months ago, toys neatly stacked in the corner, school photos taped to the fridge. "You're doing very well," he said after finishing the assessment. "A lot of cases like yours struggle for years before regaining stability after a court battle like that. You're on the right track." Those simple words made my throat tighten. Not because I needed praise, but because it had been a long time since someone looked at me, really looked, and said I was doing well. Before leaving, Carter added one more sentence as if he knew it was the one thing I most needed to hear. "Amira loves you very much, and she feels safe here. That matters more than any report." He left, closing the door softly behind him, and it felt as though a veil had finally lifted off my life. Somewhere in the city, I knew Darius was facing things he never believed would happen to him. Lawyers, investigations, public scrutiny, a sentence waiting down the line. I didn't rejoice. I didn't hurt anymore. I just felt the man who once said I was not enough was someone who had never been brave enough to face the truth. And I, the one he called weak, too emotional, unfit to raise a child, was standing here rebuilding life with my own two hands, one meal, one school drop-off, one bedtime story at a time. One night as I washed dishes, Amira ran over and hugged my legs, looked up and said, "Mommy, I want you to teach me how to bake like you." I knelt down, stroked her hair, and said, "Of course, we'll do it together. From now on, I'll teach you everything I know." When she smiled and ran into the kitchen, I stood still for a few seconds, listening to my heart beating steadily. No more shaking, no more panic. For the first time in a long time, our lives were no longer revolving around the question, when will everything fall apart again? Instead, it revolved around small things full of hope. Amira is growing. I am standing strong, and we are learning how to live again. A new chapter was opening, not loud, not dazzling, but steady and real. Something Darius and Sloane, with all their deceit, would never understand. The following weeks passed gently in a way I never thought possible before. No more waking up at night to the sound of a door opening, no more words sharpened like a blade aimed at my self-worth, and no more helplessness watching my daughter shrink into herself every time her father walked through the door. Our small apartment, modest and simple, had finally become a true place of peace, a place where Amira's laughter sounded louder than my sighs, and where no one could twist the truth to make me doubt my own value anymore. On a late afternoon at the end of the month, when spring winds slipped through the cracks in the window, carrying the smell of fresh grass and the leftover chill of winter, Amira and I sat together on our little balcony overlooking the busy Rogers Park street. She was telling me about her class, about a new drawing she made, and suddenly she turned to me and asked in a very soft voice, "Mommy, is the bad stuff gone now?" That simple question made me freeze. I looked at her round face, the brown eyes she inherited from me looking straight up with a truthfulness that caught in my throat. I nodded gently. "It's gone, sweetheart, and it won't come back." Amira rested her head against my arm as if those words were a warm blanket wrapped around her little heart. I realized children understand more than we think they know when adults tell the truth, when they lie, and when they hide pain behind a smile. The investigation into Darius and Dr. Carter dragged on for a few more months, and though I didn't attend every hearing, Attorney Abernathy kept me updated step by step. One morning in June, he called and said only one sentence: "Maya, justice has completed its course." Darius was found guilty on 2 charges, fraud upon the court and fabrication of evidence. His sentence wasn't long enough to destroy his entire life, but long enough to force him to face the truth that he couldn't keep living as if the law were a curtain to hide his selfish actions behind. According to Abernathy, during the final hearing, Darius never looked up, never tried to defend himself, never blamed anyone. He just sat there like someone who finally realized what everyone else saw long ago. He dug the hole he fell into. As for Dr. Sloane Carter, the woman who once stood in court with a professional voice and unshakable gaze, she practically collapsed. Her license was permanently revoked, her professional records marked red, and not a single organization in the field of therapy would hire her again. Her name appeared in headlines she surely never imagined seeing, beside it, psychologist involved in court fraud. When I read that, I simply closed my laptop and took a deep breath. Not to celebrate, not to be satisfied, but because I knew that what I had fought for all along was not just custody, it was the truth, the very thing they tried to distort by any means necessary. Summer came bringing warmth and longer afternoons. I continued working at the cooking center and sometimes taught small weekend classes for children. Amira loved coming with me. She sat in the corner of the kitchen wearing a tiny apron I sewed for her drawing, while watching me teach the other kids how to whisk eggs or sprinkle sugar on pastries. Sometimes she ran over to me holding a half-finished cookie and saying, "Mommy, look, does mine look like yours?" I'd look into her bright eyes at that genuine joy and say, "It looks even better than Mommy's." Those small moments, the ones I once missed while dealing with fear and turmoil, were now weaving a brand new picture in my life. A quiet picture, not perfect, but honest in the way any mother would hope for. One late August evening while we were cleaning up after dinner, Amira looked at me for a long moment and asked Mommy, "Why aren't you sad anymore?" The question came suddenly, but it was the one I had been waiting to answer. I knelt down, wrapped my arms around her, and spoke slowly, letting every word become something she could remember when she grew older, because I learned that, when the truth stands with you, no one can take away your light. Not the court, not bad people, not fear, not lies. Amira smiled, leaned her head on my shoulder, and I felt the whole world shrink down to just the two of us, full, complete, needing nothing but safety and the love we had for each other. That night, after she fell asleep, I looked out the apartment window, the city lights reflecting on the glass like stars fallen close to earth. I knew I still had a long road ahead, the road of someone who fell but stood back up on their own 2 feet. But I also knew this: I have stepped out of the darkness. My daughter has stepped out of fear, and we have found each other again in a light no one can take away. As I closed the journal, I began writing the day Darius filed for divorce. I wrote one last sentence, not for myself, but for anyone who has ever felt like me, who has ever believed they weren't strong enough to survive. Justice doesn't always arrive fast, but it always arrives to the right person. There are court hearings that last only a few hours, but the lesson they leave can follow a person for a lifetime. Maya's story is not a story about winning a trial, nor about exposing a conspiracy. It is the story of a mother pushed to the edge, slandered, betrayed, yet still standing up not for herself, but for the child who believed her mother was the only light left. And perhaps that is the power of truth. No embellishment, no noise, just enough and strong enough. If you've watched until this point, thank you for taking the time to listen to the journey of Maya and Amira. May this story remind us of one simple thing. No one has the right to take away your voice. No one has the right to decide how worthy you are to be a mother. And no one can hide the truth forever. If this story touched you even just a little, leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from in the world. And if you want to continue following stories of resilience, justice, and humanity like this, please hit like and subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming videos. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story.